47 seconds, Captain Evelyn Hart said, staring at the digital clock above the training room door. No one answered her. 3 veteran officers stood scattered across the blue practice mat, breathing hard, their confidence gone, while Officer Nia Brooks remained in the center with one hand resting calmly at her side. Her new badge caught the fluorescent light like a small silver flame. Less than a minute earlier, Kyle Bennett had laughed when she stepped onto the mat. Travis Cole had asked whether the department had lowered its standards. Mason Reed had said nothing, but his smirk had spoken for him. Now the room was so quiet that Nia could hear the old ventilation fan turning above them. Kyle straightened his uniform and looked anywhere except at her. Travis rubbed his wrist, more embarrassed than uncomfortable. Mason stared at the floor as though the answer to what had just happened might be hidden between the seams of the mat. Nia did not celebrate. She did not smile. She simply looked at the clock, then at the 3 men who had decided what she was capable of before learning her name. 8 hours earlier, her first shift at Westbridge Police Department had begun with burned coffee, cold metal lockers, and a question designed to make her feel unwelcome. "You sure you're in the right building?" Kyle had asked. Nia had been standing beneath the station's faded American flag, adjusting the collar of a uniform she had worked years to earn. Around her, radios crackled, cabinet doors slammed, and officers moved through the morning briefing room with the casual certainty of people who believed they belonged there. Nia felt every glance that lingered too long. She noticed the pause when she introduced herself. She heard Travis whisper something that made Kyle laugh. She also saw Mason hear it and choose silence. But Nia had promised her mother that morning that she would not let anyone steal the meaning of this day. So she held out her hand and said, "Officer Nia Brooks. First shift." Kyle looked at her hand before shaking it. "Right," he said. "The new diversity hire." The words landed softly, almost casually, which somehow made them sharper. Nia felt heat rise behind her neck, but her expression remained steady. Her father's voice returned from years ago, quiet and clear, never confuse fear with respect. She had carried that sentence through the academy, through sleepless nights, through every instructor who underestimated her calm because they mistook restraint for hesitation. Kyle turned toward the others. "We have a tradition for rookies," he announced. Travis grinned immediately. Mason folded his arms. Captain Hart, standing near the doorway with a clipboard, said nothing. Nia looked from Kyle to the training room beyond him. The blue mats waited under the hard white lights. Somewhere inside the station, a clock began counting down long before anyone pressed the button. Nia followed Kyle toward the training room, but the sound of his laughter faded beneath another sound from long ago, tires humming over wet pavement while she sat in the back seat of her father's old Chevrolet. She had been 12 years old, small enough that her shoes did not quite touch the floor, when flashing red and blue lights filled the rear window. Her father, Daniel Brooks, had pulled over immediately. He had placed both hands on the steering wheel and told Nia to stay calm. Nothing about that moment had felt dangerous until the officers approached with voices already sharpened by suspicion. Daniel answered every question. He moved slowly. He did exactly what he was told. Still, they treated him like a threat before they knew where he was going or why his daughter was in the car. Nia remembered the rain tapping against the glass. She remembered pressing her palm to the window and watching her father forced to stand beneath the cold streetlight while strangers searched for a reason to justify their certainty. They found nothing. No weapon. No stolen property. No crime. Only a tired man driving his daughter home from a school concert. When they finally let him return to the car, Daniel sat behind the wheel for several seconds without starting the engine. His hands trembled once, then became still. Nia expected anger. Instead, he turned toward her and said, "A uniform can give someone authority, but it cannot give them character." She never forgot it. Years later, when Daniel became sick, Nia sat beside his hospital bed and told him she wanted to join the police department. He studied her face for a long time. "Do not wear the badge to prove them wrong," he said. "Wear it to protect someone who feels the way you felt that night." That promise had carried her through college, through the academy, and through the mornings when instructors seemed surprised by her test scores. It had carried her through defensive training, where she learned that control mattered more than force, and through crisis response classes, where patience often solved what pride made worse. Now, standing outside the Westbridge training room, Nia touched the edge of her badge with 2 fingers. The metal felt cool against her uniform. Behind her, Kyle was explaining the so-called rookie tradition to Travis and Mason as though she were not close enough to hear. "Nothing serious," he said. "We just find out whether the new officer freezes under pressure." Travis laughed. "She looks calm now." "Everyone looks calm before the door closes," Kyle replied. Mason glanced at Nia, and for a brief second his expression changed. It was not kindness. It was recognition. He knew this was not an official assessment. He knew Captain Hart had never approved such a tradition. Yet when Kyle opened the training room door, Mason walked inside with the others. Nia remained in the hallway for one extra breath. The station smelled of floor polish, old paper, and coffee that had been sitting too long. Through a nearby window, morning sunlight stretched across the tile in pale gold stripes. This was supposed to be the beginning of a career she had earned. Instead, 3 men had decided to turn her first day into a test of whether she deserved to stand beside them. Nia stepped through the doorway anyway. Captain Hart watched from the hall, her face unreadable, her clipboard still closed. Kyle pointed toward the center of the mat. "Let us see what the academy taught you," he said. Nia removed her duty belt and placed it carefully on the bench. Then she looked at the 3 officers waiting under the white lights. "The academy taught me to recognize a bad decision," she said. The smile on Kyle's face tightened. The digital clock above the door remained dark, but everyone in the room could already feel it waiting. Kyle stepped onto the mat first, rolling his shoulders as though the room already belonged to him. He had spent 11 years at Westbridge, long enough to know which rules were enforced and which ones disappeared when nobody important was watching. Younger officers copied the way he spoke, the way he leaned against doorways, and the way he treated confidence as proof of competence. Travis followed because following Kyle had always been easier than questioning him. Mason entered last and closed the door behind them, turning the bright hallway into a narrow strip of light beneath the frame. Nia watched each man take his place. She had studied people under pressure for years, and the truth was often visible before anyone spoke. Kyle wanted an audience. Travis wanted approval. Mason wanted to avoid becoming the next target. None of them truly wanted to test her. They wanted to confirm a conclusion they had already reached. Kyle pointed toward a strip of tape near the center of the floor. "Stand there." Nia did not move. "Is this an official department evaluation?" she asked. His expression shifted by less than an inch. "It is how we learn whether we can trust a partner." Then Captain Hart should be inside. Travis gave a quiet laugh, but it ended when Nia looked at him. Kyle folded his arms. "You planning to call a supervisor every time something makes you uncomfortable?" The question was meant to corner her. If she refused, they would call her afraid. If she agreed too quickly, they would call her reckless. Nia had seen the same trap in other forms throughout her life. Speak firmly, and she was difficult. Remain quiet, and they assumed she had nothing to say. Work twice as hard, and they treated success like a surprise. Captain Hart appeared in the doorway before Nia answered. "I heard my name," she said. The 3 men straightened. Hart stepped inside and looked at the untouched equipment, the dark clock, and Nia's duty belt resting neatly on the bench. "Explain." Kyle smiled with professional ease. "A basic pressure assessment for the rookie." "There is no rookie pressure assessment on today's schedule." "Informal team building." Captain Hart looked at Nia. "Did you agree to this?" Nia held her gaze. "I agreed to be evaluated by the same standards as every officer in this department." Hart glanced back at Kyle. "Then there will be rules." The room changed immediately. What Kyle had intended as private humiliation now had a witness, and not one he could impress with a joke. Hart set her clipboard on the bench. She required clear boundaries, no unnecessary contact, and an immediate stop when instructed. The purpose, she said, was control, judgment, and restraint. Kyle nodded, but irritation tightened his jaw. Travis avoided her eyes. Mason exhaled slowly. Nia stepped onto the marked line and loosened her shoulders. The blue mat felt firm beneath her boots. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Captain Hart reached toward the digital timer but paused before pressing the button. "Officer Brooks," she said, "you may still decline." Nia looked at the 3 men across from her. Then she remembered her father sitting in that silent Chevrolet, choosing dignity when anger would have been easier. "No, Captain," she said. "I think everyone here needs to see this through." Hart pressed the button. Red numbers appeared above the door, and Kyle's smile returned as the first second began to fall. The first 10 seconds passed without anyone moving. Kyle waited for Nia to show uncertainty, but she gave him nothing. Her hands remained open at her sides. Her breathing stayed slow. Travis shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at Kyle for direction. Mason watched Nia more carefully now. He had expected nerves. What he saw instead was attention. She was studying the distance between them, the angle of the walls, the position of the bench, and the narrow space near the door. Captain Hart stood beside the timer with her arms folded. "Begin when ready," she said. Kyle gave a short laugh. "She is already stalling." Nia looked at him. "I am waiting for you to decide whether this is training or theater." Travis stopped smiling. Mason lowered his eyes for a moment. Kyle stepped closer, not enough to break the rules, but enough to make the gesture clear. "Out there, nobody gives you time to think." "Then why are you wasting yours talking?" Nia replied. The room fell still again. Captain Hart did not react, but one corner of her clipboard pressed deeper into her palm. Kyle's face hardened. He had built his reputation on controlling the mood of every room he entered. Officers laughed when he expected laughter. Rookies apologized before he asked. Even supervisors often let his behavior pass because his arrest numbers looked good on paper. Nia had interrupted that rhythm simply by refusing to perform the role he had assigned her. Kyle turned toward Travis and Mason. 3 against 1, he said. 1 minute. She steps off the mat, she loses. She asks to stop, she loses. We take control of both wrists, she loses. Captain Hart raised her voice. And if Officer Brooks demonstrates control over each of you, the assessment ends immediately. Kyle nodded as though the possibility did not deserve consideration. Nia looked at Hart. No unnecessary force. No injuries. Clear release on command. Correct, Hart said. That applies to everyone. Nia removed her watch and placed it beside her duty belt. The gesture was quiet, but it changed something in Mason's expression. He had seen experienced officers prepare that way before difficult exercises. Kyle noticed it too. You practiced this somewhere, he asked. The academy required preparation, Nia said. I did not ask about the academy. Then you should have read my file. Kyle's eyes narrowed. He had not read it. None of them had. They had seen her photograph, her age, and the line marking her as a transfer from another county. That had been enough for them to invent the rest. Travis moved toward the left side of the mat. Mason took the right. Kyle remained directly ahead of her, still convinced that confidence could substitute for knowledge. Nia bent her knees slightly and centered her balance. She remembered instructors teaching her that the most dangerous mistake was not fear. It was pride. Fear noticed details. Pride assumed there were none worth noticing. The timer displayed 12 seconds. Kyle glanced up at it, annoyed that the moment had not gone according to his plan. Ready, he asked. Nia looked at all 3 men, then at Captain Hart. I have been ready since I walked through the door. Hart lowered her hand. The red numbers continued counting, and Kyle finally moved. Kyle moved first, stepping forward with the certainty of someone who believed the outcome had already been decided. Nia did not rush to meet him. She shifted one foot, turned her shoulders, and let his momentum carry him past the place where she had been standing. The movement was so small that Travis almost missed it. Kyle did not fall, but he lost his balance long enough for Nia to guide him safely to one knee and release him before he could protest. The timer read 21 seconds. Travis came next, less confident now, reaching for her arm with both hands. Nia turned, redirected his grip, and placed him against the padded wall without twisting, striking, or forcing anything beyond what was necessary. Controlled, Captain Hart said sharply, reminding everyone that she was watching every choice. Nia released Travis at once. 29 seconds. Mason hesitated. That hesitation told Nia everything. He had finally understood that this was not going the way Kyle had promised. Move, Kyle snapped at him. Mason stepped forward, but his eyes were no longer mocking. He approached with caution, testing distance instead of charging in. Nia respected that. She matched his pace, blocked his path, and used the edge of the marked line to limit his movement. When he tried to circle around her, she shifted again, placed one hand at his shoulder, and directed him down to the mat in a controlled kneeling position. She released him immediately. 38 seconds. Kyle stood again, his face flushed with embarrassment. That does not count, he said. You caught us off guard. Captain Hart looked at the timer. The purpose of the exercise was awareness. Kyle ignored her. He stepped back onto the mat and signaled Travis and Mason to close in at the same time. Travis obeyed because he did not know what else to do. Mason paused, but Kyle's glare pushed him forward. Nia heard her father's voice inside her memory, steady beneath the hum of the fluorescent lights. Control is not proving what you can do. It is knowing when enough is enough. She lowered her center of balance and watched the space between the three men narrow. Kyle tried to guide the others with quick commands, but they crowded one another instead. Nia moved through the opening they created, turned Kyle away from Travis, and used the confusion to separate them without force. Travis stepped backward to avoid colliding with Mason. Mason raised both hands and stopped on his own. Kyle reached once more, but Nia caught his wrist, guided him beside the others, and said, "Stop." Captain Hart raised her hand. Assessment complete. The timer changed to 47 seconds. No one moved. Kyle stood nearest the center of the mat, breathing harder than the exercise required. Travis stared at the red numbers above the door. Mason looked directly at Nia, and the smirk he had worn earlier was gone. Nia stepped back and opened both hands, showing that the moment was over. She had not humiliated them. She had not raised her voice. She had not used more control than the situation required. That seemed to unsettle Kyle more than losing. "You set this up," he said, turning toward Captain Hart. "You knew something we did not." Hart picked up her clipboard. "I knew Officer Brooks completed advanced restraint and crisis response training. You would have known that too if any of you had read her file before deciding who she was." Travis lowered his eyes. Mason exhaled slowly. Kyle looked at Nia, searching for anger, pride, or revenge. She gave him none of those things. Instead, she walked to the bench, fastened her duty belt, and checked the fit of her radio. The badge on her chest caught the light again, no brighter than before, but the room seemed to see it differently now. "We are done here," Captain Hart said. Nia turned toward the door. Then the station alarm sounded, cutting through the silence with a sharp electronic tone. A dispatcher's voice came over the speaker, calling for immediate response to a situation at a convenience store 3 blocks away. Kyle reached for his gear. Travis and Mason followed. Captain Hart looked at Nia. "First field call," she said. Nia clipped the radio into place. The clock still showed 47 seconds behind her as she stepped into the hallway, but the real test was waiting outside. The patrol car pulled away from Westbridge Police Department with its lights flashing across storefront windows and parked cars. Kyle drove. Travis sat beside him. Nia and Mason rode in the back. No one mentioned the training room. The silence inside the vehicle felt heavier than the equipment secured around them. Nia watched the city move past the glass in quick pieces, a laundromat opening for the morning, a delivery driver stacking boxes beside a bakery, a woman holding a child's hand at a crosswalk. Ordinary lives. People who would never know what had happened beneath the fluorescent lights less than 5 minutes earlier. Kyle gripped the steering wheel with both hands. His jaw remained tight. Travis kept his eyes on the computer screen, reading the dispatch details aloud. A clerk at Benton Market had reported a distressed man shouting near the front counter. The caller believed he might have a weapon, but the information was unconfirmed. 1 child and at least 4 customers were still inside. Mason leaned forward. "Any injuries reported?" "None," Travis said. The caller lost contact before dispatch could ask more. Nia listened to the radio traffic and slowed her breathing. The fading rush from the training room was still warm beneath her uniform, but she refused to carry it into the next situation. The people inside that store did not need officers protecting their pride. They needed officers who could see clearly. Captain Hart's vehicle followed several car lengths behind them. Her voice came through the radio. Approach without sirens for the final block. Establish visual contact before entry. Kyle reached toward the controls and silenced the siren. The sudden quiet was striking. Only the engine remained, low and steady beneath them. Sunlight flashed across Nia's badge as they turned onto Benton Avenue. She looked down at the silver surface and saw a faint reflection of her own eyes. Her father had once told her that a badge could become a mirror if a person wore it long enough. Every decision would show who stood behind the medal. She had thought about those words at graduation. She had not expected to need them before lunch on her first day. Mason shifted beside her. "You could have made us look worse back there," he said quietly. Nia kept her attention on the street. "You did not need my help with that." Mason accepted the answer without protest. After a moment, he said, "I should have stopped it." "Yes," Nia replied. The single word settled between them. It was not cruel. It was not forgiving either. It was simply true. In the front seat, Travis looked toward the side mirror. He had heard them, but he said nothing. Kyle's hands tightened again. "We have a job to do," he said. "Then let us do it correctly," Nia answered. The market appeared at the end of the block, a small brick building with faded red letters above the entrance. Two customers stood near the gas pumps, waving urgently toward the officers. Through the wide front windows, shelves blocked most of the interior view. A child's yellow backpack was visible on the floor near the counter. Kyle parked across the street. The four officers stepped out into air that smelled of gasoline, warm pavement, and fresh bread from the bakery next door. Captain Hart arrived moments later and raised one hand, signaling everyone to hold position. For several seconds, no one spoke. The city continued around them. A bus slowed at the intersection. Wind pushed a paper cup along the curb. Somewhere inside the market, something metal struck the floor. Kyle glanced toward the entrance and took one step forward. Nia noticed his movement before anyone else did. She also noticed the shadow passing behind the glass, the small hand reaching toward the yellow backpack, and the frightened face of a boy crouched beside the counter. "Wait," she said. Kyle stopped, but only for a moment. His embarrassment had followed him out of the training room, and now it was searching for a place to become courage. Nia saw the difference. She stepped beside him and lowered her voice. "This is not the room we just left." Kyle looked at her. Behind the glass, the shadow moved again. Kyle looked toward Captain Hart, but she had already seen the same thing Nia had seen. "Hold your position," Hart ordered. Kyle's face tightened. For 1 second, he obeyed. Then a frightened voice rose from inside the market, followed by the sharp scrape of something dragged across the floor. Kyle reacted before anyone finished thinking. He crossed the street and reached the entrance. "Kyle," Mason called. The glass door opened, then swung back behind him. Travis stared in disbelief. Captain Hart spoke into her radio, requesting medical support and additional units, but Nia was already moving toward the window. She kept low beside the brick wall and looked through the narrow space between two advertising posters. Inside, Kyle stood near the first aisle with both hands raised. Several feet away, a man in a gray sweatshirt held a metal object close to his chest. From the sidewalk, it had looked like a weapon. From this angle, Nia could see it was a heavy tire iron. The man was not watching Kyle with anger. He was watching him with panic. His breathing was fast. His eyes moved from the officer to the child behind the counter and back again. "He is terrified," Nia said. Captain Hart joined her at the window. "Can you hear him?" "Not clearly." Then the men shouted, and one phrase carried through the glass. "They are taking him away." Nia looked at the child. The boy was crouched near the yellow backpack, tears shining on his face. The store clerk stood several feet behind him, hands open, trying not to move. Kyle took another step. The men raised the tire iron. Do not come closer, he said. Kyle stopped. For the first time that morning, his confidence disappeared completely. Nia understood the scene at once. This was not a robbery. It was a father in crisis, a frightened child, and a situation growing more dangerous with every misunderstood movement. The boy is his son, she said. Captain Hart nodded. What do you need? Space. Quiet. Keep Travis and Mason outside. Hart looked directly at her. This is your first field call. Yes, Captain. You are certain? Nia listened to the man's voice inside. Beneath the fear, she heard exhaustion. Beneath the shouting, she heard someone begging to be understood. I am certain he needs one person speaking, not four. Hart opened the door just wide enough for Nia to enter. The bell above it gave a small, ordinary chime. Every face turned toward her. Nia stopped near the doorway and kept her hands visible. My name is Nia, she said. The man's eyes narrowed. Stay back. I will. Kyle glanced at her, but she did not look away from the man. What is your name? He hesitated. Marcus. All right, Marcus. I am listening. His grip loosened slightly. They called social services. They said I scared him. I did not hurt my boy. The child began to cry harder. Marcus looked toward him, and the movement made Kyle shift his feet. Nia raised one hand toward Kyle without turning. Do not move. Kyle went still. Nia took a slow breath. Marcus, your son is looking at you. He needs to see you make a safe choice. Nobody listens to me. I am listening now. The store became quiet enough for Nia to hear the refrigerator motors humming along the back wall. Marcus's shoulders trembled. The tire iron lowered by a few inches. Then Kyle's radio crackled suddenly, loud in the silence. Marcus flinched and stepped backward. A display rack tipped against the counter. Kyle lost his footing and dropped to one knee, directly in front of Marcus. The tire iron rose again. Nia moved between them, not quickly, but deliberately, placing herself where Marcus could see her face. Look at me, she said. Marcus froze. Not him. Me. For a long second, nobody breathed. Then the tire iron began to descend, not toward anyone, but toward the floor. The tire iron touched the tile with a hollow metallic sound. Marcus did not release it, but his fingers loosened around the handle. Nia stayed between him and Kyle, her hands open, her voice low enough that he had to focus to hear it. That is a good choice, she said. Keep looking at me. Marcus swallowed hard. His eyes were wet now, no longer searching the room for an enemy. They said I was dangerous. Right now, you are frightened, Nia replied. Those are not the same thing. Behind her, Kyle started to rise. Nia extended one hand without turning around. Stay down for a moment. This time, he listened. The order carried no anger, only certainty. Marcus looked toward his son again. The boy had stopped crying loudly, but his small shoulders still shook beneath a blue jacket. Evan, Marcus whispered. The child lifted his face. Dad. That single word changed the room. Marcus's posture folded inward as if the fear had been holding him upright. Nia took one slow step to the side, giving father and son a clear line of sight without exposing Kyle. Evan needs to know what happens next, she said. You can show him. Marcus stared at the tire iron in his hand. The refrigerator motors hummed along the back wall. Outside, distant traffic moved through the intersection as though this were an ordinary morning. Then Marcus bent his knees and placed the metal tool flat on the floor. Nia did not rush toward him. She waited until he moved both hands away. Thank you, she said. Now step back. Marcus obeyed. Captain Hart entered quietly with Mason while Travis guided the clerk and the remaining customers toward the door. No one shouted. No one forced Marcus to the ground. Mason secured the tire iron, and Hart spoke to Marcus with the same measured calm Nia had established. The child ran forward, but Nia gently stopped him until the scene was safe. A few seconds later, Marcus was seated near the counter with his hands visible while a crisis counselor was requested over the radio. Evan sat several feet away, wrapped in the clerk's brown sweater, watching his father breathe. Kyle remained beside the fallen display rack. When Nia turned toward him, he looked smaller than he had in the training room. His radio had slipped from his shoulder and lay near his boot. She picked it up, checked that it was undamaged, and handed it back. "You stepped in front of me," he said quietly. "I stepped where the situation needed me. He could have hurt you. He could have hurt anyone if we gave his fear nowhere to go." Kyle looked across the store at Marcus, then at Evan. His face carried the first honest uncertainty Nia had seen from him. "Why did you help me after what happened back there?" Nia glanced at the badge on his chest. The silver surface reflected the blinking red lights outside. "Because this badge does not let me choose who deserves protection." Kyle lowered his eyes. No clever answer came. No defensive smile returned. Captain Hart had heard every word, but she did not interrupt. She simply watched Kyle stand in the silence he had created for himself. Outside, paramedics arrived without sirens. Morning sunlight stretched through the market windows and settled across the floor, warming the cold tile around the abandoned tire iron. Nia looked toward Evan as a counselor knelt beside him. The boy reached for his father's hand, and Marcus held it carefully. No applause followed. No one declared a victory. The store was simply safe, and everyone inside was still breathing. For Nia, that was what strength had always been meant to accomplish. By late afternoon, the fluorescent lights inside Westbridge Police Department had taken on a colder color. The emergency had ended safely, but the questions it raised followed everyone back through the station doors. Captain Hart asked Nia, Kyle, Travis, and Mason to report to the briefing room. The digital recording from the training room had already been reviewed, along with the body camera footage from Benton Market. No one needed to explain what the cameras had captured. Kyle had ignored a direct instruction, entered before the scene was understood, and placed everyone inside at greater risk. Travis had supported the morning humiliation without questioning it. Mason had recognized that it was wrong and remained silent. Captain Hart stood at the head of the table with both hands resting on a closed folder. "Experience does not excuse arrogance," she said. "And a badge does not protect anyone from accountability." Kyle was removed from his training responsibilities while the department conducted a formal review. Travis was assigned additional ethics and bias training. Mason volunteered to provide a complete statement about the so-called rookie tradition, including the names of officers who had been subjected to it before Nia arrived. None of them argued. The confidence that had filled the locker room that morning was gone, replaced by something less comfortable and more honest. When Captain Hart asked Nia whether she wanted to add anything, Nia looked at the three men across the table. "I do not want revenge," she said. "I want the next person who walks into this station to be judged by what they do, not by what you assume when you see them." Travis nodded first. Mason met her eyes and said, "You should not have had to prove you belonged." Kyle remained silent for several seconds. Then he placed his badge on the table and looked at its reflection in the polished wood. "I thought authority meant being the strongest person in the room," he said. "Today, I learned it might mean being the first person willing to listen." It was not a perfect apology, but it was the first truthful thing Nia had heard him say. Near sunset, Captain Hart found Nia alone in the training room, straightening the mats that had shifted during the morning exercise. The timer above the door still displayed 47 seconds. Hart offered her a future position assisting with crisis response and restraint training. Nia thanked her but said she wanted to finish her first week before making any decisions. Hart smiled faintly. "Fair enough, Officer Brooks." After she left, Nia turned off the lights. In the hallway, she found a properly fitted protective vest resting in front of her locker. A small note lay on top. It contained only 4 words, "You earned this place." There was no name, but Kyle stood at the far end of the hall, waiting beside the exit. Nia picked up the vest and looked toward him. He gave a quiet nod. She returned it, neither forgiving everything nor refusing the possibility that people could change. Outside, the evening air was warm, and the last sunlight stretched across the parking lot in long bands of gold. Nia touched the badge on her chest and remembered her father's voice. Authority could be given. Character had to be chosen. She had begun the day surrounded by men who mistook cruelty for confidence and silence for loyalty. She ended it knowing that real strength was not the ability to overpower someone. It was the discipline to protect people, the courage to confront injustice, and the dignity to leave room for redemption. As Nia walked toward her patrol car, the station behind her grew quiet. The question remained for everyone who had witnessed what happened: when someone is treated unfairly in front of you, will you join the laughter, stay silent, or become the person who finally says enough?